Welcome to the Homeownership Podcast presented by Momentum Realty, located in Hanover, Massachusetts. This series covers all things real estate and the best practices for buying, selling, and owning properties. Now here's your host, Sean Maloney.
Welcome to episode 120, Exclusive Buyer Agency Agreement Explained. I'm your host, Sean Patrick Maloney. Thanks for joining me this week. This week I want to talk to you about a very important form known as the Exclusive Buyer Agency Agreement. Not just a form, but a contract. Something that buyers tend to want to buck at, but yet it doesn't seem to be an issue to me of why they want to buck at it. Let's break it down and go over some of the ideas and impressions people have versus what it is. Because remember, when selling a home, everyone signs a listing agreement. Why is it that the buyers are so tentative when it comes to signing a buyer agency agreement? So first off, let's go over the form. We'll work our way down, and then we'll talk a little bit about each different fear and things. So in the first section, it talks about the exclusive agency agreement is made between, and it's the name of the client and the name of the broker. And then in paragraph 1, it goes over that the buyer grants the broker the right to locate or procure property, that they're the sole provider. They're going to work specifically with them no matter what when they buy a house. Terms of the agreement, it's going to go over for how long. Typically, at minimum, we see 3 months, but usually a year or 2 is a good amount of time. It really depends on the market speed. If the market speed is really high, it might be shorter, but ultimately, when we're working with agents and buyers alike together, we're looking to work with each other for a while so we can ensure that the property is going to be found and the right people are going to be involved from the beginning to the end. So some of the broker's services and duties, they're going to be using reasonable efforts to locate real property. They're going to be working through contracts, through the purchases, options, deeds, exchanges. The broker agrees in assisting locating properties, arranging showings, analyzing financing alternatives, giving advice concerning real estate practices and procedures, negotiations, going to arrange inspections around the requests of the buyer. And then the buyer agrees that this person knows that we're not an attorney, that we're not a home inspector, that we aren't a pest inspector, we're not a septic inspector, surveyor, and that they know that they have to do their due diligence towards looking at any problems at the house. And they know that we as the broker have a duty to disclose anything we know, but anything outside that we don't know, we really don't have to disclose. We don't have to disclose outside extenuating circumstances that have nothing to do with that physical property. But the buyer client should definitely take a look and have some personal investigations into the local area. The broker is going to be registered in the state of Massachusetts as a licensed broker. Now, the broker is the brokerage. The agent is the person that actually works with you. The agent is a designated agent of the brokerage, meaning the brokerage has assigned that agent to work for you as your agent. And that's why it keeps using the term broker in and out, because the contract is actually with the brokerage and the broker and not so much with the agent. Now, obviously, we have obedience, loyalty, disclosure, confidentiality, accountability, and reasonable care. Those are our fiduciary and our legal agreements with you as a client. We are going to make sure to watch out for all of those. And there's some other things in this third paragraph that just talk about that we're actually able to show other properties that you've looked at to other buyers, because that is part of our job. And then if there is a problem where we end up in an illegal status where it's a Chapter 93A thing, it's going to say that both parties are going to go, and if something comes up that one party is guilty of the other, that the attorney fees and reasonable costs are going to be covered by the other side. The buyer's duties, the buyer is to work exclusively with the broker. So that's what this is about, right? It's about working specifically with an agent and broker to find you a home. Now, I know a lot of people think, I'm going to call every broker. Well, the reality is you only need one. As long as you have one that has access to the MLS system and all these other things, you don't need multiple brokers. Multiple brokers isn't going to get you multiple results as far as the idea of on-market type of options. Remember, if it's off-market, then signing a buyer agency agreement form, we'll talk a little bit about compensation coming up, but that's a way to allow people to show us off-market as well. So we're going to, if we go out to look at properties as the buyer, part of the buyer's duties in paragraph 4 of the Massachusetts Association of Realtors, exclusive buyer agency agreement with consent to designated and dual agency. It's going over that we're going to get the buyer to send us our pre-approval within 7 days. They're going to give us the notice if they're going to look at things. They're going to let the other agent know. They're also going to know that during the time of this agreement, they have the obligation to work with us. So the majority of people who are scared of the buyer agency agreement have not had it properly explained to them. Agents who don't understand the agreement are the ones to blame. Because remember, all this stuff is pretty cut and dry, right? It's saying originally, I, the agent or broker, I have to work for you. I have to work with your best interests in mind. I have to look out for everything for you, but I'm not an inspector, a surveyor, and a bunch of other things. It's saying you, the buyer, you're going to work directly with me. You're going to let me know. You're going to give me your pre-approval. You're going to let me know when you want to see houses. We're going to work on this project together. And then the buyer's compensation is in paragraph 5. So first off, they have one called a retainer. Retainer isn't always used. There's times where it's appropriate and times where it's not. Oftentimes a retainer is used in the idea of finding a property that is not your typical. So someone tells you, hey, as the broker, I'm looking to find this waterfront property with 2 acres, a dock, and a few other different outbuildings and a pool. I, as the broker, want a buyer agency agreement with the person because I'm going to be spending time knocking on doors that may not be on the MLS or on any other public record type system for sale. So this is first saying you're going to pay a retainer up front. Sometimes the retainer will be credited against the success fee. Other times it will not. Most of the time when it comes to searching for specifics, it will not. It's actually the pay for the idea you're going to be searching for a very specific property. But if it is, it'd be credited towards what's called the success fee, which the success fee is on the second page, but it's letter B under paragraph 5. And it says that the parties agreed to a compensation of, and then that's incentive. It could be a purchase price amount or it could be a percentage. A lot of times it's done on a percentage, and then it says it's due within a certain amount of time. Ultimately, what we're looking at here is that the pay from actually closing a house. Now, if the buyer wants to, they can limit what we do. They can say just on MLS stuff, and whatever the MLS listing has for compensation will be credited towards it originally, and then the rest will be due from the buyer. But remember, as a buyer, when you are signing these success fees would be due at the time of closing. Now, if you are looking for off-market properties for sale by owners and other ones that don't have an MLS listing and they don't have compensation, then this is the point where you'd want to talk to the broker about whether you're looking for them to shop off-market for you or not. Because if you do this, this will allow them to get paid for off-market, and they'll be able to show you a lot more than just what is on the market. And then there's a blank space here that in the event within blank days, the following terms of this agreement. And what that goes over is that if I, the buyer agent, show you, the buyer, a property and you don't buy it, but maybe our contract expires tomorrow, but then you buy it the next day, it's 3 days out, then I would still be owed my fees. Unless, of course, you got a new contract with the new buyer's agency agreement, which would then disqualify this one. In the end of the paragraph, they go over that if there is compensation offered by the seller, that will credit towards this compensation, and that we are trying to get that out of the seller first. And then all fee disputes, which is paragraph C, they go over any of the controversies that we'll use the American Arbitrations Association instead of going to court. We'll go through the realtor arbitration proceedings, and that will go through a panel of 3 arbitrators, and they'll go through the current rules and association, the board of realtors. So ultimately, they're going to see who is wrong, buyer or the buyer agent, and the reasonable attorney fees and costs shall be awarded to the prevailing party of the arbitration. So this is a way where if there's a disagreement, we can go to almost like a court, but arbitration instead, and try to work it all out. Hopefully that never has to happen, and it's able to be worked out before that. Paragraph 6 is consent to designated agency. Now, this isn't necessarily on all buyer agency agreements. This is a buyer agency agreement with consent to designated agency. We at Momentum Realty are a designated agency. A designated agency simply says that whatever agent is listed is the only agent that works for that brokerage that works for you. So this means if you're a buyer and you're working with one agent and there's a seller working with another agent from the same brokerage, that does not directly constitute dual agency. It is dual brokering, but it is not dual agency. But consent to designated agency is pretty common. All brokerages in Massachusetts run off of designated agency. I like to relate it to back when people stopped working from offices so much and started using cell phones and stuff, that the privacy level went up. So designated agency is a lot more tolerable than it was back in the day when we all shared desks and folders and all things like that alike. Next up is consent to dual agency. Dual agency is when the agent represents both the buyer and the seller. So consequently, a dual agent will not have the ability to satisfy the full duties of loyalty, full disclosure, reasonable care, and obedience to lawful instruction, but still owe the duty of confidentiality of material information and duty of accounting for funds. So ultimately, their role changes a little bit, but some of the things a dual agent can do that helps out is there's not so much of the game of I'll call this person to call that person. There's also the ability to work a lot faster through the whole entire process. But knowing that designated agency is a must for most brokerages, such as Momentum Realty, but dual agency is an optional one. The reason designated agency is a must is it's actually how we practice business, whereas dual agency is something we request and we are happy to work with you on. But if you were to say that you were unhappy with dual agency, we could either do a simple cross out or change the form we're working on. Some people are comfortable with it, some people aren't. I don't want to sway you one way or the other, but ultimately we can definitely help you with that. As a designated agency as well, if you don't want the agent that you have, we can actually assign you an agent so you can have your own representation. Number 8, disclosure of identity, other brokers, potential buyers. So brokers authorized to disclose the buyer's identity. So this one is important during offering process and things. But if a person wants us to blind it, we can talk about the whys and the hows of blinding it. We can also talk with some attorneys about setting up realty trusts and different things that are meant to help blind the material and also protect the asset class. And then number 9, entire agreement governing law. This agreement in the entire is between the parties. It is binding upon the parties' heirs, successors, and personal representatives. Assignment shall not limit the rights of broker. The agreement shall be governed by the laws of Massachusetts. Unless otherwise stated, this agreement may not be modified except in writing by both parties. So that's just laying out the legal C's of it. It's just showing us who is responsible for what, and also realizing that both listing and buyer agreements are actually binding upon the party and their heirs. So that is something that is surprising to some people. Obviously, most of the times we drop chase if there is a buyer that is not with us anymore, but I just wanted to point that out. Other provisions, this is a spot where we can do a bunch of different things. It's really, we can write anything that we want. Sometimes we have to get an attorney to write certain things, but we may say this agreement does not include the purchase of 82 Main Street in Weymouth. Maybe you as the buyer already found it, feel like it would be wrong for us to get it. Or maybe the opposite way, you only want to use this for one property. This agreement is only valid for the purchase of 82 Main Street, Weymouth, Massachusetts. Then we have this agreement is only valid in the towns of Weymouth, Hingham, Cohasset, Massachusetts. Maybe you only feel confident with an agent in one area and you want to work with a different agent in another area. Not sure it always makes sense, but if it does, then that would be what would be listed. And then this agreement is only valid for MLS listed properties. This is one where you're going to see MLS properties, off-market properties, for sale by owners. Sometimes people don't want to offer compensation for sale by owners or off-market properties because of the fact that they do not get anything from the seller and the buyer will be responsible to pay. I highly recommend thinking twice about that because it allows your agent to show you the entire marketplace versus just a limited scope of the marketplace. And then another one would be this agreement includes both MLS listed properties and off-market properties. This ultimately would be what I would highly recommend because this allows them to show you the entire marketplace, remembering that if it isn't on MLS, that there is no compensation listed by the seller, but we, the buyer's agent, through this agreement, will do our best to get that seller to pay at least some, if not all, of the compensation. That said, missing houses over the compensation is probably not worth it, and it's worth seeing the whole entire market, and that's why I highly advise getting into a buyer's agency agreement and getting into it at the full level, as long as it's affordable, where you can see all on-market and off-market properties, and your agent can do the best job possible. If you're looking for an agent to help you buy a home or sell a home, or even just trying to find out more information about owning a home, reach out to us over here at Momentum Realty. We would be happy to set you up with one of our Move mentors. Thank you so much for listening this week. Make sure to subscribe. Make sure to tell your friends and families about this. Also, check out our Facebook group, our blog, and our weekly newsletter. All of them are free, giving out great information on buying, selling, and owning homes. Thanks again, and have a great week.